the living God through creation. And at various points, maybe you've experienced that this summer. Some of you have already put some pictures up here of that kind of personal encounter. But the scriptures also point to this. And some of these photos are from people in our congregation or connected to our congregation. Psalm 19, right? The heavens declare the glory of God. Some of us have experienced that personally. Psalm 65, you care for the land and water it, you enrich it abundantly. Or Psalm 104, right? These provisions of God. How many are your works, Lord? In wisdom you made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. Or Acts 14, he has shown kindness by giving you rain from heaven and crops in their seasons. He provides you with plenty of food and fills your hearts with joy. And there's that sense of the whole creation, created not just for Christians to enjoy, but for everybody. Or Romans 1, right? Since the beginning of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, right? Creation reveals God. It makes him known. Creation is good, though, even before humans were ever around. I mean, creation isn't simply good because it's beneficial to us or because we can admire it, right? In other words, creation has this intrinsic goodness. That means that it's valued by God, who is the source of all value. God values the earth because he made it and he owns it. And this is important because it can help take away an arrogant assumption that we might have that this earth exists solely for our use and enjoyment. We protect and steward the earth not because of the need-supplying value that the earth is to us, but because of the glory-given value of the earth to God. I mean, just read through Psalm 104, and you see that God makes trees for birds, and he makes birds for trees. And he makes mountains that are largely inaccessible for humans so that wild goats can run and jump in them. He makes rocks for badgers to live in, and he creates badgers for rocks somehow. And God doesn't just create this world, he creates a world which is good, which is very good. And that word good is applied to stars and to seas and to trees and to turtles. And it suggests that something more than just kind of some sort of moral goodness is implied. Think good in the sense that Genesis itself, Genesis 1 implies. That is well-ordered, fitting, beautiful, teeming with life, everything kind of in its place. That's the kind of goodness we're talking about. From the intricate, small, tiny parts to the immense parts. All of it good. And of course, sadly, things don't stay good, right? But the evil that comes later is not inevitable or a necessary part of the fabric of the world or even of us as human beings. The Bible anticipates a time when all of this will be removed, this evil. And so in the meantime, we have this clue that salvation itself is not just about being released from an evil physical body, and the goal isn't some sort of non-material, ethereal existence. The salvation that Christ brings about isn't away from this world, but salvation for which the world was made in the very first place. A new creation, no less. And so for Christians, this becomes a reminder that right on the very first page of the Bible, that our faith is world-affirming, that we may delight in the goodness of God's created order. And so much more than it being merely a claim about the process about which life came into being, Genesis really then becomes a biblical perspective on creation, which involves praise of the God who made it, on whom all life depends, and who is the source of every good and perfect gift. We're going to skip over creation being God's temple, and I think we'll focus on that in a couple of weeks. But it was in the outline, so I had to kind of keep it there for you. We want to think a little bit also about creation being good in relation to us. Christians have worked through the years, I think, pretty hard to hammer the point home that we are not to worship creation itself. We are not to substitute the creation for the Creator, right? And of course, this is true. But what this sometimes means is that we lose a sense of the sacredness of the created order. So Christians, when we emphasize that the earth is not divine, and so we should, when we emphasize that the earth is not divine, sometimes we've then regarded the earth as something only to be harnessed for human benefit. And as a result, Christians have sometimes had a pretty abysmal record of earth keeping. But there's really a fundamental difference between treating creation as divine and treating it as sacred. For example, I don't think it's difficult for many of us to speak of the sanctity of human life, but that doesn't mean that we regard humans as divine. We have no problem with that one. But something is sacred or a sanctity primarily because of its relationship to God. That's its relatedness to God is what gives it sacredness. So the earth itself is sacred. We don't worship it, but we should honor it as sacred, as something that God has created. And of course, the implications then are pretty clear, right? The way we treat the earth is reflective then on our own relationship with God. When the earth becomes sacred to you, that changes quite a bit, right? Is the earth sacred to you, or is it just kind of another retail store where we can meet our own consumptive needs? Do you love the earth? Or maybe a better question is, do you love God? And if you do, then you must also treat with respect and honor and care that which God loves and calls good, even very good. So it's pretty common, maybe in our day and age, to talk about caring for the earth as environmental stewardship. And I think it's probably the most helpful to think about that word stewardship. And a steward is somebody who comes and takes care of something on behalf of somebody else. And some of you have done this, right? You've managed somebody else's property, for example, or you've house-sitted, or you've done something like that. Maybe you had to care for the yard or the buildings. Maybe you had to even collect rent from the tenants. You try to understand what the owner wants to be done with their property, and then you manage that property accordingly. I mean, you've got a certain freedom to make a lot of daily decisions, perhaps. You got the freedom to repair things that break, to mow the grass when it needs to be mown, to protect the property when others misuse or abuse it. I mean, that's the task of what a steward does. And of course, that's the kind of task we have as stewards of the earth. We see ourselves as taking care of God's property on God's behalf. He didn't make the world just for us. He made it for himself. But he put us here to take care of it. Now, I think it's helpful if you look back at the Genesis passage and we see this mandate that's given in Genesis 1, verse 28, be fruitful, increase in number, fill the earth, subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground. Some of our confusion over our role in the environment comes from a misapplication of this mandate, of this verse. And so there's certainly critics of Christianity out there who say that the Christian system it's just hostile towards the environment because Christians are taught in this verse to dominate or to subdue the earth. In other words, that we're somehow given free license to do whatever we want with the earth. And somehow that it exists for humans to exploit or kind of judge for ourselves how we should use it. And sadly, many Christians through the years haven't proved the critics wrong by the way that we have selfishly used and exploited the earth's resources. But this notion, this way of understanding of what is being taught here is it's missing something significant. Right? This verse stems from a description of humans as being made in the image of God. I mean, this command only comes after there's this clear instruction that we've been made in the image of God. And that image is expressed in our being good representatives of God. God, who is the ultimate king over all of creation. And then we're given this mandate. To rule over the earth then, or to have dominion, as the King James translation puts it, means to be responsible stewards. I mean, God's the one who brings order out of chaos, and then he's also the preserver and sustainer of the universe. And when we rule over and when we subdue the earth, we share in this godly task, which ultimately belongs, of course, to God. And so in a sense, God is saying, go, multiply, take part in everything that I've done and created. I've now made humanity, and I bless you, and I want you to participate in my ongoing creativity, in my work of sustaining and managing what's been made. And so being a steward of the earth is this wonderful consequence of being made in the Creator's image. Chris Wright points out in this way something helpful, I think. He writes, kings and emperors in ancient times would set up an image of themselves in a far-flung corner of their domains to signify their sovereignty over that territory and its people. The image represented the authority of the true king. Similarly, God installs the human species as the image within creation of authority that finally belongs to God, creator and owner of the earth. So the natural assumption is that a creature made in the image of God will reflect godly qualities in carrying out the mandate of delegated dominion. So then human dominion over the rest of creation is to be an exercise of kingship that reflects God's own kingship. Right? This is really the classic servant kingship picture, which of course Jesus himself showed us perfectly in well, first of all, washing his disciples' feet, exercising his kingship by serving, but then also demonstrating that fully by dying on a cross for us. The universe was created, is sustained, and will be redeemed by Christ. And in short, since Jesus is Lord over creation, over all the earth, we're to care about it and to care for it. I mean, still, though, we see that there's this neglect amongst Christians and even of evangelical Christians, and even sometimes by we ourselves in our own lives. And I think it's significant because we miss out on a huge part of the story, namely a proper understanding of creation, the beginning and the goal, the beginning and the goal of what's going on in this story. And we have to make sure that our understanding of the gospel story is rooted, finds its basis in creation, and is headed in the proper direction, namely towards new creation, restoration. And when we begin to understand what the Bible teaches about the goodness of creation, and then we begin to understand that life and abundant life towards which Jesus calls us, we start to understand what that really means. And this means that our ethic, that is, our behavior regarding the earth, is to be one that lines up with God's program of redemption, God's program of rescue. We're stewards of the earth. Not just because we're supposed to care for the earth that God left in our care. We preserve and enhance the created order so that we can point to the coming rule of Jesus himself. Right? We're signposts. We're lighthouses. We do that. We point to what Jesus himself will do perfectly. We're a picture of what God is ultimately planning to complete. We point to the greatness of God and his great plan of redemption. We're stewards of the earth, not just as a resource, but as a mission, as God's people who are on a mission which will ultimately be completed by God himself. And so we're not just trying to build some sort of utopia so we can have some sort of smooth existence, but we are agents of the King and his agenda. And in Jesus Christ we have certainly the hope of the forgiveness of sins. And we have hope for our salvation. And we have hope of the salvation of all of God's creation. When we properly value God's sacred creation, we're in the right place to